In the vast darkness between stars, where civilizations rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore, there exists a species that the galaxy learned to fear. Not because they conquered worlds with overwhelming force, not because they enslaved entire populations, but because when others begged for mercy, humanity answered with something far more terrifying: compassion backed by unstoppable vengeance. The Galactic Council thought they understood warfare. They had witnessed the methodical extermination campaigns of the Zephyrians, survived the reality-bending assaults of the Void-Touched, and negotiated treaties with the planet-eating swarm lords. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for the day a small blue-green world in the Outer Rim sent a single message across all emergency frequencies. "We hear you crying. We're coming." What followed would be remembered as the Mercy War. The day humanity proved that the most dangerous predator in the universe is not the one that hunts for sport, but the one that kills to protect the innocent. And when the dust settled, every species in the galaxy would learn a fundamental truth: never, ever, make humanity's friends cry for help. This is the story of how Earth's children became the galaxy's most feared protectors, and why even now, cycles later, the mere whisper of human warships on the horizon can make entire armadas surrender without firing a shot. Ambassador Kythera had seen many species in her 3 decades of service to the Galactic Council, but the humans still puzzled her. She watched from the observation deck of Station Harmony as their newest delegation arrived, their ship a study in contradictions. The vessel was sleek and beautiful, its hull gleaming white with flowing blue accents that reminded her of water. Yet her sensors detected weapon systems that made her antennae twitch with unease. The humans themselves were equally confusing. They were neither the largest nor the strongest species she had encountered, lacking the natural armor of the Krillians or the 4 arms of the hexapods. Their leader, Admiral Sarah Chun, stood barely reaching Kythera's shoulder, yet something about the human's presence made the seasoned diplomat feel distinctly uncomfortable. Perhaps it was the way Chin's dark eyes seemed to catalog every detail of the station, or how her seemingly relaxed posture suggested a predator at rest rather than genuine calm. "Admiral Chun," Kythera said, extending her primary greeting appendages in the traditional manner. "Welcome to Station Harmony. The Council is eager to hear your proposal for membership." The human smiled, and Kythera noticed how the expression somehow managed to be both warm and predatory. "Thank you, Ambassador. We appreciate the Council's willingness to consider Earth's application." As they walked through the station's corridors, Kythera found herself stealing glances at the human delegation. There were 12 of them, representing what Chun had explained as different regions and specialties of their world. What struck the ambassador was not their diversity in appearance. Many species had regional variations, but the way they moved together. Like a pack, she realized. Like hunters who had worked together for so long that they functioned as a single organism. The council chambers were impressive by any standard, a vast spherical room where representatives from 47 species could address each other as equals. Each delegation had their own environmental section, from the aquatic depths dwellers in their pressure suits to the crystalline resonants who communicated through harmonic frequencies. At the center sat the High Arbiter, an ancient eternal whose species had been among the first to achieve interstellar travel. "Humans of Earth," the High Arbiter's voice resonated through the chamber's translation systems. "You come before us seeking membership in our council. Tell us, what can your species offer to the galactic community?" Admiral Chun stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We offer what we have always offered to those who would accept it: friendship, protection of the innocent, and the promise that those who prey upon the weak will find in us an implacable enemy." Counselor Vexthal of the Predator caste laughed, the sound like breaking glass. His species had earned their name through millennia of conquest, and they respected only strength. Bold words from such a small delegation. "Your military assets are limited, your territory consists of a single world, and your technology, while interesting, is hardly revolutionary. What makes you think you can protect anyone?" The humans exchanged glances, and Kythera caught something in their expressions that made her mandibles click nervously. It was the look of predators who had just been challenged by prey. "Counselor," Chun replied calmly, "I think there may be some misunderstanding about our capabilities. We didn't come here to boast about our military might or to make empty threats. We came to offer our friendship and protection to peaceful species and to serve notice to any who would harm them. Another delegate, this one from the Merchant Coalition, scoffed. Humans, your species is barely past chemical rockets. Our records show you only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 50 of your years. Several species in this chamber have civilizations older than your entire evolutionary history. Admiral Chen nodded respectfully. That's true, Counselor. We are young, and we have much to learn. But age doesn't always equate to wisdom, and technological advancement doesn't always translate to moral progress. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, though Chen's tone remained perfectly diplomatic. Kethera noticed that several of the more aggressive species were shifting in their seats, not quite sure how to interpret the human's words. High Arbiter Zondao raised a crystalline appendage for silence. Admiral Chun, your species' reputation precedes you. Our scouts have observed your world and your people for some time. We know of your history, your wars, your violence, your tendency toward aggressive solutions to problems. How do we know that admitting you to the Council won't simply add another predator species to an already delicate balance? For the first time since entering the chamber, Admiral Chen's diplomatic mask slipped slightly. When she spoke, there was an edge to her voice that hadn't been there before. High Arbiter, with respect, you've been watching us for some time, but I'm not sure you've been seeing us clearly. Yes, humans are capable of great violence. We've fought wars that scarred our world, developed weapons that could destroy it, and yes, we've sometimes turned our aggression on each other. But what your observers may have missed is why we fight. She gestured to her delegation, and each human stood. Dr. Martinez here comes from a region where his ancestors fought a 100-year war against an empire that enslaved his people. Captain O'Brien's great-grandmother survived a genocide that claimed 6 million lives. Lieutenant Zhang's family fled a regime that murdered anyone who dared to think differently. And each of them, every one of us, carries the memory of times when good people cried for help and no one answered. The chamber had grown quiet, and Kethera found herself leaning forward despite herself. We learned something about ourselves during those dark times, Chan continued, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. We learned that the only thing worse than a monster is a good person who does nothing while monsters prey on the innocent. So yes, we are violent. Yes, we are aggressive. But our violence has purpose, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and to ensure that when someone cries for mercy, we are there to answer. Counselor Vexthal snorted. Pretty words, human, but word are not deeds. Any species can claim to be protectors. What proof do you offer of these noble intentions? Admiral Chun looked directly at the Predator caste representative, and this time her smile was anything but diplomatic. Counselor Vexthal, I believe your species recently concluded a rather profitable slave-raiding expedition in the Kepler sector. The change in the chamber's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Several delegates shifted nervously, while others leaned forward with sudden interest. Vexthal's expression darkened. That was a legal military action against a non-council species. The general folk of Kepler, 442b, were not under council protection. No, Chen agreed, they weren't, which is precisely why we took action. The silence that followed was deafening. Kethera felt her breathing apparatus flutter as the implications sank in. The Kepler incident had been reported as a total loss. An entire Predator caste fleet had simply vanished while conducting operations against a primitive agricultural species. No distress calls, no debris, no survivors. It had been assumed they encountered some unknown spatial phenomenon. Impossible vextude snarled. Our forces numbered in the thousands. Our ships were state-of-the-art military vessels. You claim a species that hasn't even been granted council membership destroyed an entire battle fleet. Admiral Chun reached into her jacket and withdrew a small device. At her touch, a holographic display materialized above the chamber's center, showing a tactical readout. Counselor, this is the sensor log from our vessel Song of Thunder, recorded 3 standard weeks ago in the Kepler system. The hologram showed a star system with 2 gas giants and several terrestrial worlds. Orbiting one of the inner planets were hundreds of ships bearing the distinctive angular design of the Predator caste. On the planet's surface, multiple cities were burning. The gentle folk of Kepler, 442 BR, as their name suggests, a peaceful species, Chin narrated as the recording played. They had achieved agriculture and basic metallurgy, but had not yet developed space flight. According to your fleet's own communications, which we intercepted, they offered no resistance to the initial landing. Your forces proceeded to capture approximately 80,000 individuals for the slave markets of Vega Prime. On the hologram, small ships could be seen lifting off from the planet's surface, their holds full of captives. But then something new appeared on the display, a single vessel, sleek and predatory, emerging from behind one of the gas giants. This is when our single scout ship, the Whisper of Stars, sent its report to Earth, Chun continued. The message was simple. Innocent people are crying for help. What happened next took less than 12 minutes. The lone human ship moved through the Predator-cast fleet like a shark through a school of fish. Its weapons were unlike anything Kethera had ever seen. Not the crude missiles or energy beams most species favored, but something that seemed to simply unmake enemy vessels. One moment a ship would be there, the next it would simply stop existing. But what truly disturbed the watching delegates was the precision. The human ship could have destroyed the slave transports, but instead it used some kind of field to disable them without harming the captives inside. Landing craft that had not yet taken prisoners were allowed to retreat. Only those vessels that fired upon it or refused surrender demands were destroyed. 16 minutes, Admiral Chin said quietly. That's how long it took one of our ships to neutralize an entire Predator-cast battle fleet and rescue 80,000 innocent beings. You're survivors. And yes, we made sure there were survivors to carry the message, should have informed you of what happened next. The hologram showed the aftermath. Human ships, dozens of them, arriving to provide medical aid and supplies to the traumatized gentle folk. The agricultural world cities were being rebuilt with human engineering assistance, and the former captives were being reunited with their families. Counselor Vexthal was standing now, his scaled face flushed with rage. You dare attack Council species vessels. This is an act of war. Admiral Chin's expression didn't change. Counselor, I would suggest you check your own laws. The Predator cast is not currently at war with Earth. We haven't been admitted to the Council yet. Remember? More importantly, your attack on the gentle folk violated 17 different galactic conventions regarding the treatment of pre-spaceflight civilizations. Under Council law, any species has the right to intervene in such cases. High Arbiter Zondal's voice cut through the growing chaos. Admiral, are you saying that humanity has been policing galactic space without authorization? The human smile returned, and this time it was genuinely warm. High Arbiter, we've been protecting innocent beings wherever we find them. Authorization was never part of the equation. We didn't need anyone's permission to do what was right. Kethera found herself studying the faces of her fellow delegates. Some showed fear, others anger, but many, particularly those from species that had suffered under the more aggressive council members, were looking at the humans with something approaching hope. Ow! The question came from Delegate Quill of the Hive Minds. Our intelligence indicates your species has fewer than 50 ships capable of interstellar travel. How could you possibly challenge established galactic powers? Dr. Martinez stepped forward, his expression serious. Delegate Quill, I think you're operating under some misconceptions about human military doctrine. We don't fight the way most species do. We don't rely on massive fleets or overwhelming firepower. We fight smart, and we fight angry. Angry. This from the Merchant Coalition representative. Lieutenant Zhang nodded. There's an old saying on Earth, never anger a species that evolved from persistence predators. We're not the fastest or the strongest, but we don't stop. When someone hurts innocent people, we take it personally. And when humans take something personally, we become very creative in our solutions. Captain O'Brien added, every human ship is equipped with technology that most species would consider impossible. We've had to be creative because we've always been outnumbered. On Earth, we learned to win wars not through superior numbers, but through superior thinking. What kind of technology? High Arbiter Zondal asked. Admiral Chin hesitated for a moment, then nodded to her team. Dr. Martinez activated another device, and the air above the chamber shimmered. Suddenly, 30 armed humans in combat armor were standing in the space between the human delegation and the rest of the council. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates dove for cover, alarms began blaring, and security forces rushed into the chamber. But the armored figures made no aggressive moves. They simply stood at attention, weapons lowered. "Counselors, please remain calm," Chen said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What you're seeing is not a hostile force. These are holographic projections, perfectly accurate ones, but holograms nonetheless. However, if they were real, you would never have detected their approach. Human stealth technology is approximately 300 years ahead of the current galactic standard." As if to demonstrate, the holograms suddenly vanished, only to reappear a moment later in completely different positions throughout the chamber. Several delegates cried out in alarm. "Our ships function on the same principle," Chen continued. "We don't need massive fleets because our vessels can appear anywhere, anytime, without warning. We don't need overwhelming firepower because we can strike precisely where our enemies are weakest. And we don't need to conquer territory because we can protect what needs protecting without holding ground." The holograms faded, leaving the chamber in tense silence. Kethera noticed that several of the more militaristic delegates were looking distinctly uncomfortable. High Arbiter Zondao spoke carefully. "Admiral Chun, what exactly are you proposing? That humanity serve as some kind of enforcement arm for the Council?" "No," Chun replied immediately. "We're proposing that humanity be allowed to continue doing what we've been doing, protecting innocent beings throughout the galaxy, but with the Council's blessing rather than in spite of it. We're not interested in conquest, trade dominance, or political power. We want to be the species that others can call when monsters come in the night." Delegate Zypha of the Peaceful Confederation leaned forward. "And if we refuse your membership?" Admiral Chen's expression grew sad. "Then we continue doing what we've been doing, but without the Council's input or oversight. The innocent will still be protected. The guilty will still face justice. But the Council will have chosen to remain irrelevant to the process." "You're threatening us," Vexthal accused. "No, Counselor," Chen said quietly. "We're offering you a choice. You can work with us to make the galaxy a safer place for all innocent beings, or you can continue to allow predators like yourself to prey on the helpless while pretending that politics and bureaucracy matter more than basic morality. But either way, when someone cries for mercy, humanity will answer." The chamber fell into silence as the implications of the human's words sank in. Kethera found herself thinking about her own species' history, the raids they had suffered, the calls for help that had gone unanswered, the friends they had lost to legal predation by Council species. High Arbiter Zondao finally spoke. "This session is adjourned. The Council will deliberate and reconvene in 3 standard days to vote on humanity's application." As the delegates filed out, Kethera lingered, watching the humans gather their equipment. Admiral Chen noticed her hesitation and approached. "Ambassador Kethera, was there something you wanted to discuss?" The diplomat's antennae twitched nervously. "Admiral, may I ask you something in confidence?" "Of course. When you spoke of protecting the innocent, did you mean all innocent beings? Even those whose governments might be members of species you've disciplined?" Admiral Chen's expression softened. "Ambassador, we judge individuals, not species. If tomorrow a group of predator caste soldiers were being attacked by unjust aggressors, we would protect them just as readily as we protected the gentle folk. Evil is not genetic, it's a choice. And so is good." As Kethera walked away, she found herself thinking about the message humanity had sent to the galaxy. "We hear you crying. We're coming." For the first time in her long career, she began to hope that someone finally meant it. 3 days later, the Council chambers buzzed with tension as delegates filed in for the vote on humanity's membership. Word of the human demonstration had spread throughout the station, and species that had never paid attention to Council proceedings were suddenly requesting observer status. Kethera noticed that many of the smaller, more peaceful delegations seemed cautiously optimistic, while the traditional power blocks appeared nervous. Admiral Chun and her team took their places with the same calm confidence they had displayed before, but Kethera noticed additional security measures throughout the chamber. Not Council security. Those forces seemed focused on protecting delegates from each other rather than from the humans. No, these were precautions the various species delegations had implemented themselves, as if they expected the vote to trigger some kind of conflict. High Arbiter Zondao called the session to order, her ancient voice resonating through the translation systems. Delegates of the Galactic Council, we reconvene to vote on the admission of humanity to full membership status. Before we proceed, several delegations have requested the opportunity to make statements. Councillor Vexthal was the first to stand, his scaled features set in an expression of barely controlled rage. Esteemed colleagues, we face an unprecedented situation. A species has come before us wielding military technology they refuse to fully explain, claiming authority to police galactic space based solely on their own moral judgment. They have attacked council member vessels and threatened to continue doing so regardless of our decision here today. He gestured dramatically toward the human delegation. I submit that humanity represents a clear and present danger to galactic stability. They are not seeking membership, they are demanding submission. Vote against their admission, and we maintain the rule of law. Vote for them, and we legitimize might makes right. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several delegations, particularly those known for their aggressive expansion policies. But before the High Arbiter could recognize the next speaker, a small figure rose from the observer section. High Arbiter, I request permission to address the council. All eyes turned to the speaker, a diminutive being in environmental protection gear that obscured most of her features. Kithera recognized the technological signature. One of the gentlefolk from Kepler, 442b, the species the humans had recently rescued. Observer Tilmon, the council recognizes your right to speak as a representative of affected parties. The small being moved to the center of the chamber, her breathing apparatus hissing softly. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Honor delegates, my name is Tilmon, and I speak for those who survived what you call the Kepler incident. She paused, gathering strength. I was among the captives taken by the Predator caste forces. I watched my daughter torn from my arms, saw my neighbors loaded into cargo holds like livestock, witnessed the burning of our cities from the transport bay of a slave ship. The chamber had grown completely silent. Even Vexthal seemed uncomfortable as Tilmon continued. For 16 minutes, I believed my people were doomed. We had heard stories of the slave markets, knew what happened to those taken by raiders. We cried, not just with voices, but with our minds, our souls, our very essence. We cried for mercy, for justice, for someone, anyone, to help us. She turned to look directly at the human delegation, and someone answered. A voice came over the transport's communication system, speaking in our language, promising that help was coming. Hold on, they said. We hear you crying. We're coming. Tilmon's environmental suit flickered, and suddenly a holographic image appeared above her, a recording from her own memories, enhanced by technology Kethera didn't recognize. It showed the interior of a Predator caste transport ship, crowded with terrified beings, and then the sudden appearance of human soldiers materializing, as if from thin air. They didn't just rescue us, she said. They treated our injured, comforted our children, and helped us rebuild our homes. They asked for nothing in return. When we offered them gifts, they politely declined. When we asked how we could repay them, they said there was only one thing they wanted, for us to extend the same mercy to others if we ever found ourselves able to help someone in need. The little being looked around the chamber, her eyes visible now through her helmet's faceplate. Counselor Vexthal speaks of law and order. I ask you, what law protects the innocent? What order prevents the strong from preying upon the weak? The humans didn't attack your vessels out of aggression. They defended those who could not defend themselves. She moved closer to Vexthal's section. The Predator caste follows the letter of galactic law while violating its spirit. You raid non-council worlds because you know there will be no consequences. You prey on the helpless because it's profitable and legal. The humans changed that equation. Tilmon turned back to the human delegation. Admiral Chun, your species has already proven themselves to be exactly what they claim, protectors of the innocent. The question before this council is not whether humanity deserves membership, but whether the council deserves humanity's participation. As the small being returned to the observer section, a new figure stood. Delegate Quintar of the Technical Collective, a species known for their logical approach to galactic affairs. High Arbiter, The technical collective has spent the past 3 days analyzing the data provided by the human delegation. Our conclusions are illuminating. He activated a holographic display showing technical readouts and comparative analysis. Human technology is not simply advanced. It represents a fundamentally different approach to problem solving. Where most species develop incrementally, building upon established principles, humanity appears to have made several quantum leaps that our scientists describe as impossible given their time frame of development. The display showed comparative ship designs. Human vessels were smaller, more elegant, and, according to the readouts, impossibly powerful for their size. Further analysis of their stealth technology suggests they have solved fundamental problems in physics that our greatest minds have been working on for millennia. Their weapons systems appear to function on principles we don't fully understand, and their defensive capabilities. Quintar paused, looking directly at Admiral Chun. Admiral, would you mind explaining how your ship survived direct hits from weapons that should have vaporized it? Chun smiled. Our defensive systems are based on the principle that the best way to avoid damage is to not be where the weapons are aimed. We've learned to step slightly outside normal space-time during combat. You can manipulate dimensional boundaries. This from the Void Touch delegate, whose species was considered expert in such matters. Dr. Martinez answered this time. Not manipulate, sidestep. Imagine if you could take one step to the left, but instead of moving through three-dimensional space, you move through a fourth dimension. For a fraction of a second, you exist in a place where conventional weapons cannot reach you. The implications sent murmurs through the chamber. Several species had theoretical understanding of dimensional manipulation, but none had achieved practical application. Ow! Quintar asked bluntly. We had motivation, Lieutenant Zhang replied. On Earth, we had a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When you're fighting for the survival of your species, you find ways to do things that seem impossible. What motivated such rapid advancement? High Arbiter Zondal asked. Admiral Chen's expression grew somber. We weren't always united, High Arbiter. Humanity spent millennia fighting itself. Wars of ideology, territory, resources, pride. We developed these technologies during our darkest period, when it seemed certain we would destroy ourselves. She gestured to her delegation. Each of our major conflicts taught us something new. The world wars showed us the importance of logistics and coordination. The Cold War drove us to develop technologies that could detect any threat anywhere. The resource wars forced us to become incredibly efficient with limited materials. And the Unity War, she paused. The Unity War? Kethera found herself asking. Captain O'Brien answered. The war that almost ended our species. When we finally developed weapons that could crack the planet's crust, we realized we had a choice. Use them and guarantee mutual destruction, or find another way to resolve our differences. We chose unity, Chen continued. But we kept the weapons, and, more importantly, we kept the mindset that had created them. We decided that if we were ever going to point such devastating force at anyone, it would be at those who threatened innocence. Delegate Zypha of the Peaceful Confederation stood slowly. Admiral Chun, your species fascinates and terrifies us in equal measure. You speak of protection and mercy, yet you clearly possess weapons of unprecedented destruction. How do we know you won't simply become the galaxy's new tyrants? For the first time since the proceedings began, Admiral Chun looked genuinely emotional. Because, Delegate Zypha, we've been the victims of tyrants. Every human in this delegation carries the genetic memory of oppression, slavery, and genocide. We know what it feels like to cry for help and receive silence in return. She stood and moved to the center of the chamber. Earth's history is written in blood, but it's also written in the tears of the innocent and the sacrifices of those who stood up for them. We developed our capabilities not to dominate, but because we never want to be helpless again. And, more importantly, we never want anyone else to experience that helplessness if we can prevent it. Dr. Martinez joined her. There's something else you need to understand about human psychology. We're a species that forms pack bonds, not just with our own kind, but with any being we perceive as innocent or in need of protection. When we see someone being victimized, our brains literally interpret it as an attack on our own family. This is why your observers may have misunderstood our military actions, Lieutenant Zhang added. You saw aggression, but from our perspective, we were defending family members. And humans will do anything, absolutely anything, to protect their family. A new voice spoke from the chamber's upper galleries. Then, you admit you're driven by emotion rather than logic? All eyes turned to the speaker, Coordinator Vash of the Hive Networks, a collective intelligence that rarely participated in council proceedings. Admiral Chen nodded. Absolutely, Coordinator. Logic tells us that it's inefficient to risk our lives for strangers. Logic tells us that interfering in galactic conflicts will make enemies. Logic tells us that we should focus on our own welfare and ignore the suffering of others. She smiled, and this time it was fierce. Fortunately for the galaxy's innocent beings, humans have never been particularly logical when it comes to protecting others. We're the species that will charge into a burning building to save someone we've never met. We're the people who will fight impossible odds because someone needs help. Logic doesn't explain that behavior, but love does. Love. Coordinator Vash's mechanical voice carried a note of confusion. Love for the idea that innocent beings deserve protection, Chen explained. Love for the principle that might should not make right. Love for the belief that when someone cries for mercy, someone should answer. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this declaration. Finally, High Arbiter Zondal spoke. Admiral Chun, if we grant humanity membership in the Galactic Council, what assurances can you give us that you won't use your capabilities to impose your will on other member species? Chun looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as possible. High Arbiter, I can't give you that assurance, because it would be false. If a council member attacks innocent beings, we will stop them. If a council member engages in slavery, genocide, or other atrocities, we will intervene. Our membership in this body won't change our fundamental nature. The tension in the chamber was palpable. Several delegates were clearly reconsidering their positions. However, Chen continued, I can promise you this. We will always prefer diplomatic solutions. We will always seek to work within the system when possible. And we will always give warnings before we act. We're not interested in conquest or domination. We're interested in protection. Work with us, and you'll find humans to be loyal, dependable allies. Work against the innocent, and you'll discover why we've never lost a war. Counselor Vexthal stood again, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You speak of protection, but you threaten council members. You claim to be peaceful, but you wield weapons we cannot match. You ask for membership while making it clear you'll act with or without our approval. This is not diplomacy. This is coercion. Admiral Chun turned to face him directly. Counselor Vexthal, you're absolutely right. We are threatening you. We're threatening every being in this galaxy who preys on the innocent, and we're promising protection to every being who doesn't. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why. The Predator Caste delegate's eyes blazed with fury, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. High Arbiter, request permission to call for an immediate vote. The speaker was Delegate Mordan of the Collective Worlds, representing 12 species that had formed a mutual defense pact. His species have been among the most vocal critics of Council inaction regarding predatory members. The Collective Worlds have heard enough, Mordan continued. Humanity has demonstrated both the capability and the will to protect innocent beings throughout the galaxy. They have shown restraint by seeking council membership rather than simply imposing their protection unilaterally. Most importantly, they have already proven their claims through action. He gestured toward the observer section where Tilmon and several other rescued beings sat. We have before us testimony from those they've helped, evidence of their capabilities, and a clear statement of their intentions. What more do we need? Several other delegates nodded agreement, and Kethera noticed that many of the smaller, more peaceful species were looking hopeful for the first time in years. High Arbiter Zondal raised her hand for silence. Very well. The motion has been made to call for an immediate vote on humanity's application for council membership. All those in favor of admission? The voting began, and Kethera watched the display with growing amazement. Species after species that had never been able to agree on anything were voting in favor of human membership. The Peaceful Confederation, the Collective Worlds, the Technical Alliance, the Agricultural Cooperatives, delegation after delegation cast their votes for humanity. When the final tally appeared, the result was overwhelming. 39 votes in favor, 8 opposed. Humanity had been admitted to the Galactic Council by the largest margin in the body's history. Admiral Chun bowed deeply to the assembly. On behalf of all humanity, I accept this honor and responsibility. I promise you that you will never regret this decision. As the delegates began filing out, discussing this historic vote, Kythera approached the human delegation. Admiral, congratulations. I voted for your admission. Chun smiled warmly. Thank you, Ambassador. I hope we can work together to make the galaxy a safer place. I have one question, if you don't mind, Kythera said. What happens now? How do you plan to fulfill your promises? Admiral Chin's smile became something altogether more predatory. Now, Ambassador, we get to work. And the first order of business is making sure that everyone in the galaxy understands the new rules. As if on cue, alerts began sounding throughout the station. Emergency communications were flooding in from across known space. Human ships were appearing in orbit around worlds where atrocities were being committed, transmission jammers were disabling slaver fleets, and rescue operations were being launched on dozens of planets simultaneously. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't just joining the galactic community. They were changing it. 6 months after humanity's admission to the Galactic Council, the galaxy was learning what it meant to have the humans as active participants. Kythera stood in her new role as Director of Interspecies Relations, watching the tactical displays in Station Harmony's command center as reports flooded in from across known space. What she saw was nothing short of revolutionary. The Cygnus sector, which had been a notorious haven for pirates and slavers for over 2 centuries, was now reporting the lowest crime rates in recorded history. The Outer Rim territories, previously considered too dangerous for peaceful commerce, were seeing a boom in trade as human patrol ships created safe corridors between worlds. Most remarkably, several species that had been on the verge of extinction due to predation were now reporting population growth for the first time in generations. Director, her aide, a young hexapod named Clixtau, approached with the day's priority reports. We're receiving requests for human intervention faster than we can process them. Kythera reviewed the list, her antennae twitching with amazement. In just one day, 17 different species had requested protection, 12 worlds had asked for assistance with natural disasters, and 3 entire star systems had petitioned for human-mediated peace negotiations. The humans, it seemed, had become the galaxy's emergency response service. What's the human response time looking like? She asked. Average of 4.7 standard hours from distress call to arrival, Clixtau replied. For critical emergencies involving immediate threats to life, they're averaging 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Kythera shook her head in amazement. It would take most species longer than that just to confirm a distress signal, let alone mount a response. A chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The central display activated to show Admiral Chun, but she wasn't on a ship or station. Behind her, Kythera could see what appeared to be a hospital facility with beings from at least 6 different species receiving medical treatment. Director Kythera, Chun said, I wanted to update you on the situation in the Vega Prime system. Vega Prime, the center of the galaxy's slave trade for over 800 years. 3 months ago, the human fleet had arrived without warning and simply shut it down. Not through bombardment or invasion, but through a combination of economic pressure, technological superiority, and what the humans called aggressive negotiations. The final liberation teams finished their work this morning, Chun continued. We've successfully relocated the last of the forced laborers to safe worlds. The total count was just over 14 million beings from 237 different species. 14 million. Kythera felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. She had known the slave trade was extensive, but the sheer scope was staggering. What about the slavers themselves? She asked. Chin's expression hardened slightly. Those who cooperated with the liberation efforts have been relocated to monitoring stations where they'll work to help rehabilitate their former victims. Those who resisted. She paused. Let's just say they're no longer in a position to harm anyone. Before Kythera could ask for clarification, another voice joined the conversation. Director, we have an urgent situation developing in the Andorian cluster. The speaker was Commander Jackson Torres, one of the humans' rapid response coordinators. His image appeared on a secondary display, and behind him, space was lit up with weapon discharges. "What's the situation, Commander?" Chen asked. "The hegemony has launched a full-scale assault on the Gentle Shepherd's home system," Torres replied. "Initial intelligence suggests they're attempting to claim the entire system under some kind of ancient territorial mandate. The Shepherds are broadcasting on all emergency frequencies, requesting assistance." Kethera knew both species. The hegemony was a militaristic empire that had been expanding aggressively for decades, always careful to stay just within the bounds of galactic law. The Gentle Shepherds were exactly what their name suggested, a peaceful species that had dedicated their civilization to caring for orphan young from other species. They maintained vast nursery worlds where abandoned or orphaned children from across the galaxy could find homes. "How many children are we talking about?" Admiral Chen asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Current estimates are over 2 million younglings from approximately 400 species," Torres replied. "The Shepherd are trying to evacuate, but their ships aren't designed for high-speed transport. At current rates, they'll need at least 6 days to complete evacuation. The hegemony fleet will reach the primary nursery world in 18 hours. Kethera watched Admiral Chen's face transform. The diplomatic mask vanished, replaced by something that made the ambassador's instincts scream warnings about apex predators. "Commander Torres, you are authorized to implement Protection Protocol Omega," Chen said. "All human forces in surrounding sectors are to converge on the Andorian cluster immediately. Rules of engagement are weapons-free for any hegemony vessel that does not immediately withdraw." "Admiral," Kethera interrupted, "the hegemony is a council member species. Any action against them would require council authorization, and—" Chun turned to look directly at her, and Kethera's words died in her throat. "Director, with all due respect, there are 2 million children about to be caught in a war zone. Council authorization is not a factor in this equation." She turned back to Torres. "Commander, what's our force disposition in the area?" "We have 47 ships in range, including the Righteous Fury and the Shield of Hope. Admiral Morrison is commanding the task force." "Tell Morrison this is priority alpha," Chun ordered. "Whatever it takes, those children do not get hurt. If the hegemony wants a fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget." As Torres signed off to coordinate the response, Kethera found herself facing a situation she had never imagined. "Admiral, I need to inform the Council immediately. A military action of this magnitude is already underway," Chen finished. "Director, I appreciate your position, but humanity doesn't ask permission to protect children. We can discuss the political ramifications after those younglings are safe." Before Kethera could respond, the command center's communications array lit up with incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. Species after species was offering assistance to the human rescue operation. The Peaceful Confederation was providing hospital ships. The Technical Alliance was offering advanced sensors to help locate all the children, and even some traditional isolationist species were opening their borders to provide temporary refuge. "Admiral," a new voice joined the conversation. This was Director Ahala of the Shepherd Command Council, her four-armed figure appearing on the display. Behind her, the chaos of evacuation was evident. "We cannot express our gratitude. Our people are mostly non-combatant medical and childcare specialists. We would have been helpless against a full hegemony assault." "Director Ahala," Chen replied, "how many ships do you need for a complete evacuation?" "At minimum, 200 heavy transports." "But we don't have—" "You do now," Chen interrupted. "Human evacuation fleets are already en route to your position. We'll have every child off those worlds and to safety within 12 hours. Kethera watched the tactical displays as the human response unfolded. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed performance. Ships appeared throughout the Andorian cluster as if materializing from empty space, their stealth technology allowing them to position optimally before revealing themselves. Medical ships moved to established triage points. Transport vessels began systematic evacuation procedures, and combat ships formed a protective perimeter around the nursery worlds. "How do they do it?" Clixtal whispered beside her. "How do they coordinate so many ships across such vast distances?" The answer came from an unexpected source. High Arbiter Zondal's image appeared on the main display, her ancient features showing a mixture of awe and concern. "Director Kithura, Are you monitoring the human operations in the Andorian cluster? Yes, High Arbiter. I was about to contact the Council regarding. I've been in communication with Admiral Chun, Zondal interrupted. What we're witnessing is unprecedented. The humans aren't just running a rescue operation. They're demonstrating capabilities that fundamentally change the balance of power in the galaxy. On a tactical display, the human fleet had completed its deployment. What had been empty space an hour ago was now filled with hundreds of ships, all perfectly positioned for their assigned tasks. But more impressive than the numbers was the coordination. Every vessel knew exactly what it was supposed to do, and they were executing their missions with clockwork precision. High Arbiter, Chen's voice joined the conversation. The evacuation is proceeding ahead of schedule. We should have all children safely relocated within 8 hours. Admiral, I need to ask about the hegemony fleet, Zondal said carefully. Our sensors show they've stopped advancing. On the display, the tactical situation became clear. The hegemony's invasion fleet, over 1,000 ships representing one of the galaxy's most formidable military forces, had come to a complete halt approximately 1 light hour from the nursery worlds. They weren't retreating, but they weren't advancing either. The hegemony fleet received a message, Chen explained. We informed them that any ship that continued toward the nursery worlds would be disabled or destroyed. We also transmitted complete tactical data showing our fleet positions and capabilities. You showed them your entire deployment? This from Counselor Vexthal, whose image had just joined the conversation. That violates every principle of military strategy. Admiral Chen smiled, and Kithera was reminded why that expression had made her so uncomfortable during their first meeting. Counselor, we showed them enough to make it clear that continuing their attack would result in the complete destruction of their fleet. Sometimes the most effective weapon is information. What kind of information could possibly stop a 1,000-ship invasion force? Vexthal demanded. Dr. Martinez appeared beside Chun on the display. Counselor, we provided them with detailed analysis of their ship's capabilities down to the individual vessel level. We showed them the exact locations of every weak point in their armor, the precise frequencies needed to overload their shields, and the specific attack patterns that would disable each ship type with minimal loss of life. Impossible Vextudsnorted. Such analysis would require approximately 37 minutes, Dr. Martinez interrupted. Our tactical analysis computers are quite efficient. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. The humans hadn't just stopped the hegemony advance. They had done it by demonstrating that they understood the enemy's capabilities better than the enemy did. Admiral, High Arbiter Zondal asked quietly, how many ships do you actually have in the Andorian cluster? Enough, Chen replied simply. That's not an answer. Chen's expression grew serious. High Arbiter, humanity learned long ago that the best way to win a war is to make it clear that fighting would be futile. We have enough ships in the Andorian cluster to ensure that every child gets to safety and that anyone who tries to stop us regrets the decision. Beyond that, specific numbers aren't relevant. A new alarm sounded, and Torres reappeared on the display. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony fleet. Their commander is requesting permission to speak with you. Put him through. The display shifted to show a massive reptilian being in elaborate military regalia. This was War Commander Sithik, one of the hegemony's most feared military leaders. His reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary, and he had never lost a battle in over 2 centuries of warfare. Human Admiral, Sithik's voice was carefully controlled. I wish to discuss terms. War Commander, Chen replied politely, the terms are simple. You withdraw your fleet from the Andorian cluster immediately. There are no other terms to discuss. You have perhaps 200 ships, Sithik said. I command over 1,000. Surrender now, and I will allow your evacuation vessels to depart with the children before I claim this system. Admiral Chan was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Commander Torres, please show the War Commander our actual deployment. The tactical display shifted, and suddenly, the truth became visible. What had appeared to be a few hundred human ships was revealed as an elaborate deception. The actual number was impossible to count precisely, but it was clearly several times larger than the hegemony force. More disturbing was their positioning. Human ships were literally surrounding the hegemony fleet in 3 dimensions, having somehow approached undetected to within weapons range. War Commander Sithik stared at the display in stunned silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something Kythera had never expected to hear from a hegemony commander: fear. "How long have you been positioned around us?" "Since before you entered the system," Chen replied. "War Commander, you're one of the finest military minds in the galaxy, but you've made a fundamental error. You assumed this was going to be a battle. What else would you call it?" "A rescue operation with interference," Chen said calmly. "We're here to save children. You're here to attack children. One of these missions is going to succeed, and the other is going to fail catastrophically. Your choice is whether your fleet limps home with damaged pride or gets towed home as scrap." The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, Sithik spoke again. "Human Admiral, you could have destroyed us without warning. Why the negotiation?" "Because unnecessary death serves no one," Chen replied. "Your soldiers are following orders, not choosing to harm innocents. We prefer to give reasonable beings the chance to make reasonable choices. And if I choose to continue the attack..." Admiral Chen's smile vanished. "Then you'll discover why humanity has never lost a war, and your fleet will become a memorial to the dangers of threatening children under our protection." War Commander Sithik looked at his tactical displays one more time, then straightened in his command chair. "The hegemony fleet is withdrawing from the Andorian cluster. This operation is postponed indefinitely." As the hegemony ships began their retreat, a cheer went up throughout Station Harmony's command center. But Kythera noticed that the humans didn't seem to be celebrating. They looked satisfied but not surprised. "Admiral," she said, "how did you know they would withdraw?" Chun turned to face her, and for the first time, Kythera saw something deeply sad in the human's eyes. "Director, every species believes they're the apex predator until they meet an actual apex predator. The hegemony has spent centuries as the biggest, meanest force in their part of the galaxy. But they're not stupid. When someone demonstrates that they're outmatched, most reasonable beings choose to live rather than die for pride. And if they had chosen to fight, then 2 million children would still be safe, and the galaxy would have one fewer threat to innocent life," Chen replied without hesitation. "Director, humanity doesn't bluff. When we say we'll do something, we mean it. Every potential aggressor in the galaxy needs to understand that." As reports came in of successful evacuations throughout the Andorian cluster, Kythera realized she was witnessing more than just a rescue operation. This was humanity announcing to the galaxy that the age of predators preying on the innocent was over. From now on, there would be consequences for those who chose to harm the helpless. The message was clear. When innocents cried for mercy, humanity would not only answer, they would arrive with enough force to ensure the crying stopped permanently. 1 year after the Andorian cluster incident, the galaxy had learned to live with a new reality. The humans had not simply joined the galactic community, they had fundamentally altered it. Kythera stood in the newly constructed Memorial Hall on Station Harmony, reading the names of species that had been saved from extinction in just the past 12 months. The list was longer than she had expected. The gentle folk of Kepler 442b were thriving, their population having doubled as refugees from other human rescue operations chose to settle on their peaceful world. The nursery worlds of the gentle shepherds had become the safest places in the galaxy, protected by permanent human patrol fleets. Most remarkably, 17 species that had been classified as terminally endangered had been moved to stable population growth status. But it wasn't just the rescue operations that had changed everything. The humans had introduced concepts that most species had never considered possible. "Director Kythera," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see Dr. Elon Okafor, one of the newest members of the Human Diplomatic Corps. Unlike the military representatives who had first introduced humanity to the Council, Dr. Okafor was a specialist in what the humans called restorative justice. "Dr. Okafor," Kythera replied, "I was just reviewing the quarterly reports. The numbers are extraordinary." "Which numbers concern you?" Okafor asked, joining her in front of the memorial wall. "All of them, frankly. Crime rates have dropped by 73% in systems under human protection. Slavery has been virtually eliminated in 14 sectors. 3 major conflicts have been resolved through human-mediated negotiations. But what puzzles me most is the recidivism data." Okafor smiled. "Ah, you're looking at the rehabilitation programs. 91% success rate," Kythera said, her antennae twitching with amazement. Dr. Okafor, these are beings who were classified as irredeemably criminal by every psychological profile in the galactic database. How are you achieving these results? Would you like to see for yourself? An hour later, Kythera found herself on a transport heading to what the humans called a redemption station, one of 12 facilities they had constructed to house former criminals, slavers, and other beings who had chosen to prey on the innocent. What she saw when she arrived challenged everything she thought she knew about justice and punishment. The station was beautiful. That was her first surprise. Instead of the sterile, prison-like environment she had expected, the facility looked more like a small city, with parks, educational centers, and what appeared to be recreational areas. Beings from dozens of species moved freely throughout the complex, many of them wearing identification that marked them as former criminals. The first principle of human restorative justice, Dr. Okafor explained as they walked through the station, is that punishment without rehabilitation is simply revenge. We're not interested in revenge. We're interested in preventing future victims. They stopped in an observation window overlooking a large workshop where former Predator caste raiders were working alongside their former victims, building prosthetic devices for beings who had been injured in various conflicts. "That's Vekthul," Okafor said, pointing to a large reptilian figure carefully calibrating a mechanical arm. Former slave raider, personally responsible for the capture and sale of over 3,000 beings. He's been here for 8 months. What changed him? Kythera asked. We introduced him to some of his former victims. Okafor replied simply. Not for confrontation, but for conversation. We showed him the long-term consequences of his actions. Not just the immediate harm, but the generational trauma, the psychological damage, the way his crimes rippled through entire communities. Kythera watched as Vekthul gently fitted the prosthetic arm to a small, bird-like being, a member of the skylark species that had been targeted by predator caste raids for decades. He volunteered for this assignment. Okafor continued. When he learned that many of his victims had suffered permanent injuries, he asked if there was anything he could do to help. We've trained him as a prosthetics technician, and he's become one of our most skilled craftsmen. And he's not planning to escape or return to his old life. Where would he go? Okafor asked. His former criminal network has been dismantled. The Predator caste has officially renounced slave raiding after what happened to their fleet at Kepler. More importantly, he's discovered something most criminals never experience: the satisfaction of helping others instead of harming them. They continued through the station, and everywhere Kythera looked, she saw similar scenes. Former pirates were training to become search and rescue specialists. Ex-slavers were learning to become counselors for trafficking victims. Beings who had once profited from violence were dedicating their lives to healing the damage they had caused. Dr. Okafor, she said finally, this is remarkable, but surely not every criminal could be rehabilitated this way. Okafor's expression grew serious. You're absolutely right. About 9% of the beings we encounter are genuinely irredeemable, usually due to neurological disorders, psychological trauma so severe that they cannot function in society, or what we call fundamental evil. These individuals are housed in specialized facilities where they cannot harm others, but are still treated with basic dignity. And if they escape, they don't, Okafor said simply. Human detention technology is comprehensive, but more importantly, most don't want to escape. Even the irredeemable ones are usually more content in a safe, structured environment than they ever were in their criminal lives. As they returned to the station's central hub, Kythera noticed a familiar figure entering the facility. War Commander Sithik of the Hegemony, the same military leader who had attempted to attack the nursery worlds a year ago. Commander, Dr. Okafor called out. How was the inspection tour? Sithik approached them, his massive frame somehow managing to convey humility despite its intimidating size. Enlightening as always, Doctor. The agricultural projects on Theta Station are exceeding all expectations. Kythera stared at the former Hegemony commander. War Commander, what are you doing here? I'm no longer a war commander, Sithik replied. After the Andorian incident, the Hegemony High Command decided that my tactical judgment had become compromised. I was given the choice of retirement or reassignment to frontier patrol duties. And instead you came here? I requested permission to study human conflict resolution methods, Sithik explained. The humans were generous, enough to allow me to observe their operations firsthand. Dr. Okafor smiled. The commander has been instrumental in developing our new protocols for rehabilitating former military personnel. His insights into warrior psychology have helped us design programs that address the specific psychological needs of professional soldiers who have lost their purpose. You're treating former enemy commanders as consultants? Kethera asked incredulously. Who better to understand the mindset of aggressive military leaders than someone who used to be one? Okafor replied. Commander Sithik has helped us develop programs that have successfully rehabilitated over 200 former military officers from various species, including several who were responsible for war crimes. Sithik nodded gravely. Director Kithura, I spent 2 centuries believing that strength was measured by one's ability to defeat enemies and conquer territory. The humans taught me that true strength is measured by one's ability to turn enemies into allies and transform conquest into cooperation. As they prepared to return to Station Harmony, Kithera found herself struggling to process what she had witnessed. The humans weren't simply policing the galaxy. They were actively working to eliminate the root causes of criminal behavior. Dr. Okafor, she said during the transport flight back, these rehabilitation programs must be incredibly expensive and time-consuming. Wouldn't it be more efficient to simply eliminate the criminal elements? Director Okafor replied, humans learned long ago that violence breeds violence. If we simply killed everyone who committed crimes, we would eventually become the very monsters we sought to eliminate. Our way takes longer, costs more, and requires more effort, but it actually solves the problem instead of perpetuating it. But surely there must be some resistance to these methods? Some criticism of being too soft on criminals? Okafor laughed. Oh, there's criticism, but it usually comes from species who haven't thought through the implications. Would you rather have a galaxy where former criminals are either dead or plotting revenge, or a galaxy where former criminals are actively working to repair the damage they caused and prevent others from making their mistakes? When they arrived back at Station Harmony, Kithera was surprised to find Admiral Chun waiting for them in the diplomatic quarter. But the Admiral wasn't alone. Standing beside her were representatives from 18 different species, including several that Kethera recognized as traditional isolationists who rarely participated in galactic affairs. Admiral, Kethera said, what's happening? Director, I'd like you to meet the founding members of the Galactic Protection Alliance, Chun replied. Representatives from species that have decided to adopt human protection and rehabilitation protocols in their own territories. Delegate Cora of the Isolationist Coalition stepped forward. Her species hadn't participated in the Galactic Council for over 3 centuries. Director Kithara, my people have observed the changes humanity has brought to the galaxy. We are impressed. We have decided to open our borders for the first time in generations to participate in these protection efforts. The Alliance represents over 400 star systems and 46 species, Chen explained. They've agreed to implement unified standards for protecting innocent life, rehabilitating criminals, and responding to emergency situations. Kethera felt her worldview shifting once again. Admiral, you're creating a parallel government structure. Not parallel, Chun corrected. Supplemental. The Galactic Council handles politics, trade, and diplomatic relations. The Protection Alliance handles emergency response, criminal justice, and defense of innocence. We're not trying to replace the Council. We're trying to fill the gaps where the Council cannot or will not act. Representative Yix of the Technical Collective activated a holographic display showing star maps. Director, the Alliance has already prevented 3 potential genocides, stopped 2 expanding wars, and rescued over 6 million beings from various forms of exploitation. The cooperation between species has reached levels we've never seen before. What about the species that don't join the Alliance? Kethera asked. They're free to continue as they always have, Chen replied, as long as they don't prey on innocents within Alliance-protected space. If they do, well, they'll discover why most reasonable beings choose to join rather than oppose us. As if to emphasize the point, alerts began sounding throughout the station. On the main display, an emergency broadcast was beginning from the Outer Nebula region. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the UEF Compassion's Edge, the voice announced. We are responding to distress calls from the Cristalli homeworld. A rogue artificial intelligence has taken control of their planetary defense systems and is threatening to sterilize the entire surface. All civilians are being evacuated to Alliance protection ships. The tactical display showed the situation. A beautiful crystalline world surrounded by its own defense platforms, which had somehow turned against the population. Alliance ships from 6 different species were coordinating evacuation efforts, while human technical specialists worked to disable the rogue AI. Time to resolution? Admiral Chen asked. Estimated 43 minutes for complete evacuation, 17 minutes for AI neutralization, came the reply. Kethera watched in amazement as the Alliance operation unfolded with clockwork precision. Species that had been enemies just years ago were working together seamlessly, united by a common goal of protecting innocent life. The humans had done more than change the galaxy's power structure. They had fundamentally altered its moral framework. Admiral, she said quietly, you've started something that can't be stopped, haven't you? Chen's smile was gentle but determined. Director, we've reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten. That protecting innocence isn't just a nice idea. It's the foundation of any civilization worth having. Once people remember that, once they see what's possible when we work together for good instead of competing for advantage. She gestured toward the display, showing the successful evacuation. This becomes inevitable, as rescue ships reported that the last civilians had been safely evacuated and the rogue AI had been neutralized without a single casualty. Kithera realized she was witnessing the birth of a new kind of galactic order. One where mercy wasn't weakness, where protection wasn't optional, and where the cry of any innocent being would be answered by an entire galaxy united in their defense. The humans had kept their promise. When beings cried for mercy, the Deathbringers had answered, not with death for the innocent, but with death for the age of unchallenged predation. And, in its place, they had built something unprecedented, a galaxy where the strong protected the weak, not out of obligation, but out of choice. 5 years after first contact, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before humanity's arrival. Kethera, now serving as the first Director General of the Galactic Protection Alliance, stood in the observation deck of the newest Alliance headquarters, a massive station constructed at the confluence of 6 major trade routes. Through the viewports, she could see ships from over 100 species coming and going, but more importantly, she could see what those ships represented. The massive vessel docking at Base 7 was the CSV Healing Song, a Crystalli medical ship that served as a mobile hospital, providing care to refugees and disaster victims across 17 sectors. At Bay 12, the RSS Technical Marvel, operated by the formerly isolationist technological collective, was loading supplies for a terraforming project that would create new homes for species whose homeworlds had been damaged by past conflicts. Most remarkably, at Bay 3, the hegemony vessel Redemption's Dawn was preparing to depart for the Outer Rim, carrying former hegemony military officers who now served as mediators for territorial disputes. Director General, her aide Clixtal announced, Admiral Chun is here for your scheduled meeting. Kethera turned to see the human admiral entering her office, but she was surprised to see that Chun was not alone. With her were 3 beings that represented the fundamental transformation the galaxy had undergone. Vekthul, the former Predator caste raider who now headed the Alliance's rehabilitation programs. Tillman, the gentlefolk representative who had become one of the galaxy's most effective advocates for vulnerable species. And War Commander Sithic, who now served as the Alliance's chief of conflict resolution. Admiral, Kethera said, I wasn't expecting such a distinguished group. Chun smiled, the same warm but predatory expression that had both comforted and terrified beings across the galaxy for 5 years. Director General, we wanted to brief you on the latest developments before tomorrow's council session. Tilma On stepped forward, her small frame somehow commanding the room's attention. Director General, the suffering index has reached the lowest point in recorded galactic history. The Suffering Index, a human innovation that measured the amount of preventable pain and injustice across known space. When humanity had first joined the galactic community, the index had been so high that most beings considered widespread suffering an inevitable part of existence. Now, for the first time in millennia, entire sectors were reporting periods of 0 preventable deaths due to violence, starvation, or neglect. The numbers are remarkable, Kethera agreed. But I understand there's a new challenge we need to discuss. War Commander Sithik nodded gravely. Director General, we've encountered something unprecedented. A species that actively refuses protection, rehabilitation, or cooperation. They call themselves the Void Reapers, and they represent a philosophy we've never dealt with before. Vekthal activated a holographic display showing a star system on the galaxy's edge. The Void Reapers don't raid for profit or conquest for territory. They exist purely to cause suffering. They view pain and death as artistic expressions, and they consider mercy to be a form of cosmic blasphemy. How many worlds have they affected? Kethera asked. 17 so far, Chen replied. They've completely sterilized 6 worlds, enslaved the populations of 4 others for what they call pain festivals, and turned 7 planets into what can only be described as torture museums. The holographic display showed images that made Kethera's exoskeleton shiver. The Void Reapers didn't simply kill. They had turned suffering into an elaborate science, creating devices and methods for prolonging agony that were beyond anything the galaxy had previously imagined. Alliance response? She asked. Every conventional approach has failed, Sithik admitted. We've tried negotiation, intimidation, economic pressure, and even limited military action. They interpret every form of opposition as validation of their philosophy. When we rescue their victims, they claim we're depriving them of their artistic medium. When we destroy their facilities, they build more elaborate ones. When we try to rehabilitate captured Reapers, they actively resist all attempts at psychological intervention. Tilmon spoke quietly. Director General, I've worked with trauma victims for 5 years. I've helped beings recover from every form of abuse and exploitation imaginable. But the survivors of Reaper attacks, some of them beg us to end their lives rather than continue living with the memories of what was done to them. For the first time in years, Kethera saw genuine uncertainty in Admiral Chen's expression. The humans had solved every problem through some combination of superior technology, innovative thinking, and relentless compassion. But the Void Reapers seemed to represent something beyond conventional solutions. What are you recommending? Kethera asked. That's what we came to discuss, Chen replied. For 5 years, humanity has operated under the principle that every being can be redeemed, every conflict can be resolved, and every problem has a solution that doesn't require the complete destruction of our enemies. The Void Reapers are challenging that fundamental belief. Vekthal stepped forward. Director General,